the winter time is really, for me, it's like an unveiling or revealing time. So a lot of things that are hidden during summer with the full leaf out or with the spectacular fall foliage are revealed, or you can get a good look at them during the winter time. So anyway, so we'll go over some of those things. One thing that I just wanted to, a couple things to mention for you to consider as you go out on your walks is to, wintertime is often a time when we want to go on really brisk, fast walks to stay warm. But to really see a lot of nature, you need to slow down and walk quietly, maybe with very little talking, if possible, so that you can actually hear the natural world that is surrounding you. So just kind of slow down, just like nature has gone into a slowing pattern for winter. Maybe consider taking a little bit slower walk and being more aware of what you're taking in through your senses as you're walking. So before I start, I've got a lot of pictures of things, and but before we do that, I just wanted to read to you a passage from Thoreau's A Winter Walk. Every year for me, once the leaves fall, I come back to this passage every year. I read it every single year. It's one that sort of captures for me what a walk in the winter woods means. So just a little context for this passage. During Thoreau's time, it was not uncommon for people of means to have cabinets in their homes, in their parlors, with stuffed specimens, sometimes their favorite things that were behind glass. And it wasn't just birds or, maybe little mice or things like that, but it was also vegetation. And they would attach them by screw and gum. And so there's a reference to that in this passage. So anyway, let me go ahead and read this passage to you. So this is from A Winter Walk by Henry David Thoreau. In winter, nature is a cabinet of curiosities, full of dried specimens in their natural order and position. The meadows and forests are a hortus siccus. The leaves and grasses stand perfectly pressed by the air without screw or gum. And the birds' nests are not hung on an artificial twig, but where they built them. We go about dry-shod to inspect the summer's work in the rank swamp and see what growth have got the alders, the willows, and the maples, testifying to the many warm suns and fertilizing dews and showers. See what strides their boughs took in the luxuriant summer, and anon these dormant buds will carry them onward and upward another span into the heavens. So I thought tonight we would take a look at the cabinet of curiosities in the glorious woods that surround Northwest Branch. So one thing before I get going, I just can't resist as an educator to encourage you to get one of these. It's a little magnifying glass. So if you have binoculars, great to take them out. But anybody that loves the natural world should have a little magnifier so that you can see things really in good fine detail. They're really inexpensive, just like $1 or something on Amazon or in a store. The other thing that I just would like to encourage you to do is to take trails that you may not normally take. I mean, there are so every trail around the Northwest Branch is special. They're all a little different. You'll see different things. and it'll give you just a different perspective. So, change things up a bit. So as you kind of start on your winter walk, I, invite you to do a few things. One is to maybe start, really engage all of your senses, not just what you see, but take time to listen. Listen to the silence, to the calling birds. At what point do you no longer hear the cars from Route 29 or from Kent Mill Road? Um, how does the light pass through the trees? There's just so much to see and hear and smell, and textures to feel. So really try to, when you slow down, you've got time to kind of engage with your senses some. So at some point, it's really a nice thing to sort of look at the broad view of what you're seeing, what you're immersing yourself in, kind of looking at layers that you may see, canopy, trees, that are at different positions through the canopy, what's in the understory, what's on the ground. So just kind of get this overall view of where you're at before you start kind of zeroing in. Okay, so a couple of things as you're walking through. I'm just going to go through some of these slides pretty quickly. I am obsessed with the forest, and that's why I go into it every day. I find a lot of solace there. When I retired from full-time teaching, I suddenly had the time to really spend in the woods, and I spent most of it in the Northwest Branch woods. And I found my walks got slower and slower, and I saw more and more and more as I've really slowed down. And it just can have a real dramatic impact on your physical and mental well-being. So as you look at the trees, look at them from top to bottom. Their canopies are different. You'll see some of the trees. See if I can find my mouse. I don't know that here. Some of the trees are still going to hold, some of the deciduous trees will hold their leaves. So we'll look at who they are that hold. Look at the different shapes of trunks. Trunks and bark is fascinating. It's really beautiful. Oftentimes when we walk in a winter woods, some people might say, oh, it's so drab. Everything's gray and brown. Well, an artist would say there are lots of different shades of grays and browns and tans, and they really are so beautiful. And trees have very different shapes that you may never notice in other seasons. So take a look at, the trees as you're passing by. You may see, some that look like this one over on the right that have a very large base, but have 2, 3, 4 trunks coming out. That's a sign that the tree was cut and then it sent off that many suckers, basically, that developed into those large, several trunks from one base. So don't forget to look not just at eye level, look up, because many trees, their bark is not the same from the base to the top. And we tend, when the leaves are on the trees, we don't really see the structures up at the top, and they can be so beautiful. This beech tree here was a picture that I took up on the Copperhead Run Trail, one of the new bike trails that's up on the ridge line on the Burnt Mills east side. You can see at this tree here, it's got lots of bumps. They look like little tumors. I'll go over what they are. It's a maple tree, but you can see that this older branch, the bark is totally different than this really young one. So young trees don't look necessarily from a bark's perspective, like older trees are. So take a look at their bark structure. It's so amazing. There's so much variation, really beautiful. Use your hands. Maybe when you're walking to touch the barks and just kind of get a more tactile experience as you're walking through. There are some that are really crooked, some that peel, their bark sheds. The only thing I encourage you to not do is to touch any vines, especially the hairy ones, poison ivy. And oftentimes, this upper picture here is a poison ivy vine. And sometimes it's not always hairy. Sometimes it looks like all these little tendrils coming off of a solid wooden vine. So just kind of, be careful about. I'd say not to engage with touch on those hairy vines. But bark is really beautiful, and it's a time of year when we can really stop and notice the variation that there is in nature. And most of these pictures in here I took since the beginning of November. And some of them, my pictures didn't come out well, so I had to take some off the internet. So you'll notice that there are some deciduous trees that hold their leaves most of the winter. And there are really three major types that do this in our area. This one on the left is the American beech. The bark is really smooth and beautiful. It's often a tree, unfortunately, that people will carve their initials in. But the leaves stay on the tree. They're paper thin. When you see an American beech touch the leaves, they are so cool. That doesn't feel like any other leaf. So a nice one to spend a little time with. The one on the right here is the Musclewood, which, some of them will lose their leaves, but many of them, do hold them. And the other ones are the oaks, tend to hold their leaves. So this process of a tree holding on to a deciduous tree holding the leaves is called marcescence. They don't really know exactly why it happens with some types of trees and others. Right now, the oak leaves will often kind of dry up, kind of curl, and they'll turn brown. But right now, a lot of the red oaks still are really, really bright red. They're beautiful. So the other thing to kind of look at with some of the trees is which ones have like ornaments hanging on them. These ornaments are dried fruits that stay with the trees through the winter. On the right, it's the American sycamore, and this is the tulip tree. We'll spend a little bit of time sort of looking more closely at both of these in a few minutes. Another thing that you can see more clearly in the winter woods is branching patterns. So, a lot of trees in the forest are going to just try to grow up straight to the sun, get up there as quickly as they can. Many of them will drop some of their lower limbs so they can put all their energy into upward growth. But the branching patterns can be really, really beautiful. And there are three major types of branching that you'll see. Some alternate on the trunk. Some are opposite from one another. These would be, there's an acronym for remembering which ones are opposite. Most of them are going to be alternate. Opposite, the acronym is MAD horse. MAD is maple, ash, dogwood. Horse stands for horse chestnut, which is not a native tree. And there are a few around here and there that people have planted, but it's really mostly at this point the maples and the dogwoods, because unfortunately we've lost a lot of the ash trees. And then another pattern is a whorled pattern, a whorl, so they're in a whorl, all coming out from the same point. So kind of a fun thing to look for as you're taking a good closer look at trees. So another thing to look for are squirrels' nests, which are called Dreys, and they look like a very haphazard collection of leaves, but actually Their construction is very complex. They are insulated and they're waterproof, remarkably. So squirrels would prefer to be in a cavity in a tree, but there aren't enough cavities for everybody that wants a cavity. So they build these nests. So they start out with kind of weaving twigs together, and then they cover the twigs with something soft. So like moss, leaves, pine needles, things like that. And then they build kind of like a globe around it that is a network of small branches and vines and leaves. So it's actually pretty, looks messy, but it's supposedly quite cozy. And in the summertime, they'll build platforms because it's too hot, it's too warm in there. So they'll kind of lie on like a bed of a nest bed. The other thing that's really fun to look at, I love looking for these, are cavities. So they're really kind of like two kinds of cavities in trees. And I think the most interesting ones are the ones that you'd call a natural cavity. They happen because there's been some kind of injury or limb loss. And anytime a tree has an opening, the opportunistic fungi start growing and they'll start the process of decay and these cavities form. So why are so many heart-shaped? I don't know, but I've got two that are kind of heart-shaped here. One really large one down at the bottom. I'm not sure exactly what happened in that one. My suspicion is this is something called a burl, which we'll get to in a minute, that ended up with some kind of injury on it. So cavities, quite fun. They provide really important homes for many animals, escape places from predation, nesting sites. So you can just find more of them. You don't notice them, you don't see them when there's leaf cover, but lots of them out there, and they're fun to, at least I think they're fun to look for. Some other cavities are made by animals. So the ones that are most active are the woodpeckers. And how you can tell the difference between an animal-made cavity, like from a woodpecker, and one that's kind of a natural cavity that happens from a limb loss, is those natural cavities are irregular in shape. Woodpecker cavities, they are not irregular. They are either round or oval. They may be kind of square, rectangular, but they have very clean edges to them. The woodpeckers are pretty neat. And the size varies depending on which woodpecker makes them. So the smallest ones would be from a Downy woodpecker that would be maybe about an inch diameter, and the pileated woodpeckers would make really big ones, like 4 or 5 inch diameter. And these cavities are really deep. A woodpecker cavity, a pileated woodpecker cavity can be like a foot deep, depending on how big the tree is. So these are really can be very large cavities inside, and fungi help them too in clearing out that space. And woodpeckers generally will use a cavity for 1 year, and then they'll make a new one the following year. So these holes get occupied by other animals. And another type, it's not really a cavity, but a hole that a woodpecker makes is made by one of our really spectacular winter migrants, the yellow-bellied sapsucker, that makes these really cool sapwells. This picture here, I'm having trouble with my mouse. Over here on the right, they're not very deep, they're small, but if you, and they tend to be in trees that have really high sugar content. So maples, hickories are favorites for the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and they make them in these amazingly neat rows. So you'll see row and row and row, and somebody sometimes just run one right after another, rows of them along a tree. Sometimes they'll make a row and then they'll go up several inches and another row. And it's a place where they just dig a hole large enough into the vascular tissue that with their tongue, they can lap up the sap. So that is also available to other birds, and in the springtime to butterflies too. So lots of woodpecker holes out there to, you often hear, them going after they're the birds that you'll probably hear before you'll see it. So these things are really interesting to look for and find. Again, another thing you might not even notice in the spring or in the fall, and they're called burls or galls, and galls. They're irregular growths that happen, and they usually result from some kind of injury. The difference between them is a burl is large, and it's on a trunk or a branch. A gall would be this top thing on the top right here. A gall is on a twig or on a leaf. They're more common on oaks. And these little galls are made generally by, this one is called apple gall because it looks like a little apple. In the spring, it looks like a little green apple. Right now, they look like little brown, kind of almost like a puffball, maybe about the size of a little ping pong ball. And wasps will lay their eggs on these twigs in the springtime and in the summer. And then as the eggs hatch and the larvae form, the plant responds by dividing, the cells divide, and they make this like little growth that surrounds the larva. So the larva has a home made by the plant and an automatic source of food. Pretty amazing, really cool thing. It doesn't seem to harm the plants at all. These larger burls are usually a result of some kind of injury, and then it can be viral, it can be fungal caused. Insects, bacteria can cause them as well. So if you've ever walked on the Falls Trail on the eastern side of 29, as you're going from the sandy beach area up the trail to go through the rocks, that's where this tree is. This burl does not look very big from this picture. It's huge. You can't miss it. Very cool things to look at. One of my favorite things to do in the wintertime is to look at tree buds. They are spectacularly beautiful. And that's where a hand lens can sometimes come in handy. So along either side of, if you're on the Rachel Carson Trail or the Northwest Branch Trail, they've planted, a lot of small trees have been planted. And so you can get close at eye level and take a look at some of the buds. The buds are nature's hope. They're the tree's hope. They're the leaves and the flowers that are going to give, come to us next spring, that are kind of like just little special magical packages surrounded by these transparent, overlapping scales. And they come in a variety. Every species has their own bud. So they're different shapes and colors. And you don't have to be right next to a twig to see one. Just look up into the canopy. Even when you're looking at trees that are really tall, you can see on the branches that there are kind of like bumps and lumps. The bumps and lumps are the buds. And my favorite, this one over here, just from the top going across from left to right, this is a spice bush. We'll come back to this in a little bit. These two are red maple. They are, they're the easiest to see, and they're big. And the red maples, first trees that are going to leaf, that are the buds will swell in the spring, so they'll be the first ones to bloom. And everything about a red maple is red. and really important source of food for squirrels when their nut stores get low in the winter. They love the red maples. And then at the bottom, this is a bitternut hickory. They're yellow. So if you see a yellow bud, you know you got a bitternut hickory, kind of a cool thing. This one right here, the next one is a American beech. It looks like a lance. Got to be careful. You don't get them in the eye. They're very, very sharp. This one I think is a white oak. This one over here, you know, when I was walking the last, since the leaves have been down, just kind of preparing for this talk, I didn't really, I'm sure there are dogwoods in there, but I just had a hard time finding one that I could definitely say this is absolutely a dogwood. Their buds are really cool. They look like little onions. Those are going to become the flowers. And the other ones kind of look like little cat claws, and those are going to become the leaves. So buds, really beautiful to look at, and they are our hope for a really leafy and flowery spring. Some other things to kind of take a look at is noticing what's underfoot. All of the leaves that have fallen, just taking some time just to look at them. Their shapes are different, their colors are different, even though, you know, you may say, oh, they're all brown. Well, they're not. They all look a little different. They all have their own individuality, and so important for soil regeneration. As soon as they hit the ground, the earthworms and arthropods start chewing them up so that the bacteria and the fungi can decompose them completely and release nutrients into the soil for healthy plant growth. So one of the things that you'll probably notice if you start looking just at leaves on the trail is you'll see some like this one on the left that has these very symmetrical, perfectly round holes. It's like, oh my God, how did that happen? And that's the sign of a chewy little insect, most likely a caterpillar, that was having a nice tasty meal of a leaf before it unfurled in the spring. And these, again, all over the place. If you start looking for them, you'll see them. Once you start looking, you're going to see them everywhere. So the other thing, as you're walking, the leaves make such wonderful sounds. The leaves that are still on those oak trees, as the wind's blowing through them, there's that kind of rustling sound that they make on a windy day. That's just really nice to just stop and listen to the sounds of the forest. And the leaves are such a big part of that. It's a dry leaf sound, very different from green leaf sound of summer. So this sort of something to take notice of, and a lot of rustling around. When you hear rustling, don't assume automatically, oh, it's just a squirrel or a chipmunk. The chipmunk should be starting to hibernate now. It's cold enough that they'll hibernate, but it's not always squirrels. There are a lot of birds that forage on the forest floor. So it could be a towhee, it could be a flicker, woodpecker looking for ants. So leaves. What's still green out there? Certainly the American holly, and the ones that have the red berries, those are the female trees. So holly comes in male and female. Flowers are on separate trees, so you know you've got a female tree if you've got the red berries. The Christmas ferns stay green all winter. And just one thing to sort of take a look at, you know, if you think about, well, like, why were they called Christmas ferns? Is it just because they were around the holidays? Yes, but if you look at the little leaflets on this fern that's on the bottom here, and if you look at each one, look how it has this little curved part at the top, and then it drops. It almost looks like a hanging stocking on a fireplace. So this, get up close and personal with the ferns. They're pretty cool too. The other thing, and I personally think the best feature of the Northwest Branch is the mountain laurel. Oh my God, you don't have to go anywhere to see mountain laurel except here. This is hands down best place in the region to view the spectacular flowers, those star-shaped flowers that come out at the end of May that are white to pink. Gorgeous. This is an evergreen shrub, and we'll look at some close-ups of them in a little bit, but they are, I think my favorite place along the trail is, I guess, what would be called the Rachel Carson Trail. There are so many, they're like mountain laurel tunnels that you can walk through that are just so beautiful. Another thing that's a little harder to find that's green out there, this thing up in the top right is called club moss. It's not a moss. It's more closely allied with ferns. It kind of looks like a miniature pine tree, or miniature cedar. But it's a very, very primitive plant around when the dinosaurs were around, and they were massive back then. They're hard to find. I found them under mountain laurel. So kind of going through those laurel tunnels, you might have the chance of finding some club moss. And still blooming right now is the witch hazel. Right? So the witch hazel, most of the leaves have fallen off, but this is down in the bottom right corner. They're the only native tree in Maryland or shrub that flowers in the fall. And the flower is yellow. It's like 4 like long ribbons. And they're in bloom all over the Northwest Branch. So you just have to look a little closer to find them. So there are some scattered conifers. There's some eastern white pines, and there are a few even eastern hemlocks. I found them sort of over near Springbrook High School and up on one of the, looking down over the falls at the fall line. On the eastern Burnt Mill side, there are a few hemlocks in there. And kind of the difference, the eastern white pine is really super fragrant. It's one of those luscious smells of a forest if you've got some pines in there. The needles are long and they're in bundles of 5. That's how you know you've got an eastern white pine. And the cones are kind of, are long, and the hemlock has very tiny, about a 1/2 inch needle that are flat and they're round at the edge, and their cones are really small too. And the hemlocks that I've seen around here, I haven't seen them with cones. It's really kind of out of their range. We're getting to the point with changing climate where they're not going to really be able to thrive here. There really just aren't very many. And then the green carpets, the moss, I like to kind of refer to them as our green carpeting in the forest. They're pretty amazing, grow on the soil, grow on rocks, grow on trees, rotting logs. They really will dry out, very, very dry during a drought. But as soon as we get a little rain, they just, really swell up and are soft and cushiony. And this one on the bottom, sorry about that. This one on the bottom has its fruiting stalk on it. So in that little stalk are spores that can give rise to more moss. Some other green things out there, the lichens, kind of the first colonizers on bare rock. And they are sort of, some of them look almost like somebody's painted on a surface like this one. Really having trouble with my mouse here. Sorry about that. This one here, it almost looks like somebody just kind of went across that tree branch with some paint, but that's actually lichen. And there's a lot of that out there. And then the crusty looking lichen, that they're everywhere. And the lichen is actually two different kinds of fungi and an algae that grow mutualistically together. They help break down bare rock to create little pockets of soil so that then moss can grow in there, and then ultimately ferns, and help really get the process of succession going. Fungi, especially when we've had some rain, you'll find a lot of really cool, really cool fungi. And all of these, I took pictures of all of these somewhere on one of the Northwest Branch Trails since November, beginning of November. So lots of variation there, and sometimes some really cool colors. Some of them are called jellies, like this yellow one is witch's butter, and there's another darker jelly down here. It's what is this one called? A black jelly roll, it's called. And then most often we see the turkey tails, and then these large bracket fungi that are kind of like shelf coming out of a tree. Just some interesting things to do if you're sort of interested in fungi, or you have a little adventurous one with you along your walk. And if you have a hand lens, is let that little guy or gal, or if you're, not too shy to get down on your belly and look on the underside of fungi. That's where all the action is, right? So underneath, some of them will have gills, some of them will have pores, some will look like they have teeth, some will be smooth, and all that is part of what you need if you wanted to try to identify them. But they're really cool to look at from the bottom side. Another thing I love about our trails here are the decorated rock formations. There are some really cool rock formations, and that have lichen and moss and ferns and little saplings growing on them. So this is another thing to enjoy as you're walking along. They're so beautiful. The power of water. So there are some really amazing erosional features on the fall line in that eastern Burton Mills rock or side. So these really great bowls that have been worn by water, and the little waterfalls that are on the creeks, that are smaller creeks that are coming in. Maybe take some time to sit by the water for a while. The fragrance of the water, it always smells so good to me. And just the sound, there's something about the sound of flowing water, whether it's a tiny little riffle or whether it's a waterfall, or even the water that's moving at a more still rate is really quite a lovely thing. So, we all know that the water quality has some issues, but still it's quite beautiful. And as the temperatures start to drop and we get to below zero, it's really amazing to watch the ice form and to just look at the patterns of ice formation at the top of the creek. And I'm sure many of you remember, I'm not sure, maybe some of you, at the end can remind me what year it was, but several years ago, I think it was when we had one of the polar vortex, dip down. Remember when the Northwest Branch was frozen and people were ice skating on the Northwest Branch? It was so amazing. I don't think we're going to have that kind of a winter this year, but just kind of enjoying ice formation, even if it's just a very light coating on the surface, is really quite a nice thing to kind of take a look at. Other fragrances, I put a little picture of a fox here because you're more likely to smell a fox than you are to see one. Fox have a number of scent glands around their face, around their tail, and under their paws. And it's very musky. Some would say it smells rather skunky. It's sort of like they wear bad perfume, and they will, that's how they communicate. So they will, they will put their scent on their mate, and they'll leave the scent behind so that they can mark their territory. They mark their mates. They conveys their status in their fox community. So that kind of musky smell that sort of skunky, it's sort of like, is that skunk? So that's something for sure that you may see. The other thing up here on the top, you'll see there's quite a bit of this along, let's see, on the Rachel Carson Trail, sort of like halfway between Kemp Mill and Route 29. And it's this dry plant. It's called the beefsteak plant. And in the summertime, it has green vegetation. It often has a purple stem, and it has sort of this raceme or stalk with tiny little light purple flowers. Well, it keeps these dried flowers all winter long. Birds eat them, eat the seeds and the dried fruit. And these are very fragrant. So if you see one, just break a stalk. You'll feel the stalk is square, has a square edge to it. So that means it's in the mint family. To me, the stalk, when you break the stalk and smell it, to me, it smells a little licoricey. But if you take your fingers and run your fingers along and take some of the dried flowers off, they smell kind of like basil. It's really a very, very fragrant plant. Really nice one. It's not along every stream. It's not along the entire Northwest Branch. So kind of a special winter fragrance. Another thing are, of course, the white pines have that lovely piney smell. And then down at the bottom here is the spice bush. So a spice bush, every part of it has a spicy fragrance. And they've done some research on and it has a lot of medicinal qualities to it. There are actually 39 different oils that comprise this fragrance. It's really amazing. But if you find it's a bush, and if you find a bush that has these round green to yellow buds on it, and then look closely at the bark. The bark is kind of smoothish, but it almost looks like it has white goosebumps on it. So if you touch it, it has kind of this little bit of a bumpy texture to it. So that's spice bush. So if you take your fingernail and very gently just scratch with your fingernail one of the twigs and smell it, and it has this beautiful spicy fragrance. So another kind of thing to look for in the winter as far as fragrances. So I thought I would just run through a few trees if you're interested in trying to identify. I know I love to find out. I love to look at things and then try to figure out what they are. And there are a few trees that I think are really pretty easy to actually identify even without their leaves in the winter. And all of these trees that I'm going to go over, there are just a few of them, are common in our woods here. Tulip tree is the first one. Usually tallest tree. It's tall and straight. They drop their lower branches, so you usually don't see branches on the bottom. They want to put all their energy in getting to the top of the canopy. If you look up, you will see at the top It almost looks like it's filled. It's like this massive candelabra up there. And those are the dried flowers with seeds. So if you look at this bottom picture here, you see these seeds? They're everywhere. They are everywhere. If you have them in your yard, you step on them with bare feet. They're sharp. They're everywhere. Those are the tulip tree seeds, and they're attached at the base of this dried flower, and they stay on the tree all winter. And good reason. They are an incredibly important source of food for a lot of birds, squirrels. So, you know, if you have one, if you're walking along a ridge line and you see some bird action in a tulip tree, stop and watch. If you have binoculars, the birds really go for these seeds. This is just what the flower looks like, you know, which I'm sure many of you see them all the time in the summer. They are the flower that drips nectar. There is so much nectar. Everybody comes to take a sip. The squirrels drink the nectar. The tiger swallowtails, this is their host tree. Hummingbirds will come to them. But I just wanted to put the flower up there because many of you know the flower. But a young tulip tree, the bark is looks very different from a mature tree. So another one, the American sycamore. This is the camouflage tree, the tree that looks like it's wearing camouflage. It's kind of got brown, gray, green, kind of camouflage-like bark. And then if you follow the tree up, usually the upper trunk and branches are white and sometimes stark white. They're almost like this big moon, you know, against a blue sky. And they exfoliate their bark. Their bark is very thin and they're fast growers. So as they grow, the bark gets shed. And there's a point in the year, it's usually like in the summer, where there is sycamore bark all over the forest floor. But they too hold ornaments. They hold these sycamore balls. And so when you look up, you find the sycamore, the camouflage tree, white up at the top. Look and you'll find these balls at the top. Those hold the seeds. The seeds are, the balls are hard in the winter, and as the season progresses, they'll get softer. And in early spring, they'll drop, and you'll see these all over the place where there's sycamore. They're kind of like almost feathery. They float on the water. So kind of, you know, you can definitely find a sycamore. They're waterside trees. They like it wet. The other one, the American beech that I mentioned before, I put a picture of a beech nut on here that maybe you might be able to find maybe next year early in the fall, because these are super sweet nuts and everybody wants to eat them. All the animals love these seeds. So you most likely will not find any beech nut seeds, but you might find some of their kind of prickly husks. But as I said before, the buds are beautiful. They're lance-shaped and really, really pretty buds to look at. And you know, take a touch of the leaves. They are so different texture-wise from others. The red maple, as I said before, everything about it is red. The twigs are red, the buds are red, the flowers are red, the fall leaves are red, and the buds are big. And so you can see them even from a tall maple. And their bark looks pretty different. A young maple, the bark is smooth compared to an older one. And as I said before, incredibly important source of food for squirrels when they're the end of winter, beginning of spring. You'll see them on maple trees. These are going to also be the first trees to flower. And so the squirrels go crazy when they start flowering. And sometimes they'll flower. Flowering is really more about the photo period, the amount of light, lengthening days. But sometimes they'll flower in, you know, mid-February. So early, but good for the squirrels. The musclewood looks like a tree that's got, you know, some buff to it. It's a smooth bark, but it's sinewy. It's sort of, it looks like it has this kind of muscle-like appearance to it. it'll hold its leaves, and the leaves sort of look like a folded pleated skirt. They kind of have that, look about them. And the buds are kind of shiny. It looks like they're outlined. Each bud scale looks like it's outlined in white. They're real soft, but a really handsome tree. The river birch is another really common tree. It's another tree that exfoliates. It's got this peeling bark. So the young trees, the bark is lighter in color, and it gets more like this on the right as they age. These trees are also streamside, and they often grow hanging over the stream, just trying to get to the light. So another tree that kind of the bark busts from its thin bark, so it peels or exfoliates as the tree grows. Lots of oaks out there. There are two that are probably the most common that are relatively easy, I think, to identify: the white and the northern red. So the white oak trees, if you look at a tree and as you go up, it starts to have the bark kind of is like, it looks like it has sheets or layers that are sort of loosening from the tree. That's a white oak. And if the leaves are still on, which many of them do hold their leaves, they have rounded lobes. We didn't have a mast year this year for acorns, so the animals did a pretty good job of getting the acorns for food. The white oaks are the prize. They are the sweet acorns. So the deer and the squirrels and turkeys kind of get those up right away. The northern red oak, I think it looks like ski tracks, like cross-country ski tracks. So the bark is kind of flattened, and it almost looks like ski trails. And so you can kind of tell there. And they seem to hold their leaves better than the other oaks. And their leaves have a bristle tip. So it has this little kind of pointy tip. Let me see if I can. It's really having trouble with my pointer here. Sorry. Like that right there. It's sort of this pointy tip. And the white oaks don't have that pointy tip. But lots of oaks out there, and lots of them holding their leaves right now. My favorite, the mountain laurel. Even though they're not flowering right now, they still have some pretty cool structures to look at. One, their bark is beautiful. It's reddish brown. It's sort of, it's not really peely, but it's, I don't know how it sort of shreds or splits. And it's just got a real nice feel to it. And then if you look really closely right now at the mountain laurel, you'll see this structure here. It looks like kind of a stalk with many little balls on it. That's the fruit. Right, that contains the seeds. That's where the flowers were. So they're around. A lot of them have burst open already, and the seeds have been set. But some of them may still be containing seeds. And then in this particular picture right here, you can also see the buds. So there are different buds on this particular shrub for leaves and for flowers. So just so beautiful. Box elders. This is the messy tree. It kind of is like the tree that's the unmade bed. It looks like it has branches going hither, dither, all over the place. It just looks kind of like a sloppy tree. Another streamside tree. They often have some of their new twigs are green. So like this picture down on the right, they're dark green. So when you see that kind of coming out from this sort of sloppy looking trunk, that's a box elder. And they're in the maple family. And so they have, how maples have the little helicopter seeds. These seeds kind of look like that. And they often hang on for a while. So they're a really important food source. The leaves are gone, but I left the leaf up here because it's a compound leaf of 3. So it sort of looks like poison ivy in a way. But anyway, a really important stream side tree. I think kind of an easy one to identify. And then I just wanted to bring attention to the loss of the ash trees. White and green ash trees should be very common here. And we've lost most of them, actually, entire East Coast, Canada down to Florida, 35 states, all of the eastern provinces of Canada have lost hundreds of millions of ash trees to the emerald ash borer. And if you ever walk along the trail that you can get on from Kemp Mill Road, there are a number of downed ashes there, and there are still some that are standing, which I'm surprised the county has not taken down, because they typically like to take them down or fear of them falling and injuring somebody. So this tree that's standing with the trail marker on it is somewhere on that trail, I think before you cross the bridge to go over to the other side of the stream. So the deal with this insect is it's from Asia. It came here in 2002, they think in wooden packing material into Michigan. And it spread, and it only will go attack, or it lays eggs on ash trees. And the adult really doesn't kill the tree. It may nibble leaves. The problem is the larva. So it lays the eggs in the bark, and then the larva burrows in and feeds off of the vascular tissue, the tissue that's supplying water and nutrients, moving nutrients through the tree. So it kills the tree. And you'll see these trails of the larva in the dead wood. And when they emerge, they kind of, the emergent adult, once it's gone through its metamorphosis, will make these little D-shaped holes that they come out of. So you can see those on these down trees over off of the Kent Mill side trail. You can see this right there. And then there's this phenomenon that they've started calling woodpecker blonding. So this tree, see how it has, you've got the regular colored bark here, and then there are these lighter patches. What they have found is that woodpeckers, along with some other native like parasitic wasps, are natural biocontrols. I mean, they don't have it under control by all means, but the woodpeckers do eat these larvae. And what they do to get to them is the woodpeckers peel off the outer bark to get to the inner bark. So it leaves this kind of whitish pattern on the tree, and they now call it woodpecker blonding. So when you see a tree like that, that's a tree that is dead. It's, you've lost it to the ash borer. So unfortunately, these trees, extremely important in, this whole from, across the whole East Coast. Hundreds of butterflies and moths use these trees as hosts. The seeds are important sources of food for a wide variety of animals. So a real tragedy that we've lost these trees, but there are signs of this over there. And the birds. Okay, so I just wanted to go through all of the birds. I haven't taken any of these pictures, but all of the birds that I'm going to show you, I've either seen or heard since the beginning of November. So these bright flashes across the landscape, blue jays, the blue jays that are here are not the ones that were here in the summertime. These migrate in. The same for the bluebirds. Some of them are resident birds here year round, but there may be some migrants. The cardinals are year-round residents for us, but it seems like, I don't know, I seem to see a lot more bluebirds in the wintertime in the woods than I ever see in the summer. Just birding in the winter, if you're not a birder and you're interested in starting, start now when there's no leaves, because you can see them. So it's a good time to be a beginning birder. So there are a lot of birds that will flock together. They form these friendly winter flocks. They help each other find food. They let each other know when there are predators like hawks about. And so we've got the Carolina chickadee that's sort of the leader of the pack, Downy woodpecker. They usually hang out with them. The white breasted nuthatch, tufted titmouse. So the little chickadees, you'll hear them. They have kind of a soft voice. They go chickadee dee 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 dee. Really like they're super fast. The tufted titmouse are loudmouths. They're the ones that sound like Peter, 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 Peter. And then this guy over here on the right, the Carolina wren, that's another little bird with a very big voice. Tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle tea is its call. So they'll hang out with some sparrows. The song sparrow down here on the bottom right is a resident bird. The other two on the screen, top right is the dark-eyed junco, one of my favorite winter migrants. It's a gray bird with a pale pink beak. You never notice the color unless you look with binoculars. They're really cute. And when they fly, you get kind of this flash of white from their tail. Probably the prettiest song of winter is from the white-throated sparrow. It's a sparrow, type looking bird, but it has a white throat. And it's got this lovely white throat, and it has these yellow, most of them, there's a variety that doesn't have these yellow markings, has a striped head. They have the prettiest song. I cannot sing, but it sort of is like, oh, Canada, da 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 da. I wait for their song every fall. Can't wait to hear when they're here because they are the sweet song of the field and the forest. And if you have a backyard feeder, they're probably with this flock enjoying the seeds. So also the house sparrow will hang out with them. They're over here. These guys were introduced into, I think it was New York, like in the mid 1800s, and they've spread kind of everywhere. They often compete pretty intensely with the house finch, which is also not a native bird. It's from the US, but from the West, also some in Mexico. But they all hang out in this kind of winter flock together. The robin is not part of the flock, but the robins are certainly about, but the robins like the blue jays are not the robins that we have in the spring. These are robins that have migrated to us from the north, and they tend to hang together in the wintertime. They don't necessarily do that in the spring, but you'll see lots of robins. And when you're walking in the woods, the quieter you are, the more birds you'll see. And so when you're walking on a trail, great places to see birds along the stream and anywhere where there's kind of thickety vegetation in the understory. When you're going near a thicket area, really slow down. And you'll see birds, it's called the plow. So as you're moving on the trail, you're the plow, and they'll kind of hop from one bush or thicket to the next in front of you, right? So when that happens, just stop and stand there. Find a place to sit. It takes about 15 minutes to reach baseline, that the birds will come back out and they'll realize, oh, he or she, they're not a problem. They're just sitting there like a rock. They're not moving. They're not endangering me. And they'll come out and start moving about, looking for food. And then you'll get more of a view. If you're really lucky, you'll see these are some birds that the hermit thrush usually doesn't hang out. You may see them once or twice and then not see them again. So if you see them, really lucky. I saw both of these maybe about a week or so ago, maybe a week or two ago, off of the Kemp Mill Trail. If you're looking downstream on the left side of the stream and that thickety area, sort of towards the beginning of the trail, I saw both of these same day. It was like, oh my God. The winter wren looks really different than the Carolina wren. It has a much shorter tail. It doesn't have that white bar above its eye, and its chest is kind of got this barring to it. The hermit thrush has kind of a rusty tail that it cocks. So it'll cock it up and then it will lower it really slow. So, and it'll stand. I mean, I've watched them and been pretty close and just stood really still, and they kind of watch you and cock their tail and it drops. But a really nice, if you see one, wow, you're lucky. A couple other things you might be lucky to see is a flock of cedar waxwings. They are wanderers, but I saw a flock just a few days ago. Where was it? It was on the West Burnt Mill side. They kind of pass through where there's food. Really beautiful, handsome birds. Ruby crowned kinglets. They're tiny, so harder to find. You really need some binoculars to see them. And then our woodpeckers. We have a wide variety of woodpeckers. You'll definitely see Downies, probably for sure, most likely pileated. Hairy and the Downy look a lot alike. The Downy is much smaller, little beak. The hairy has a beak that's longer than its head, and it's a larger bird, but they have the same kind of patterning. Oops, did I miss? The yellow-bellied sapsucker has a yellow belly, kind of white wing patches. This is a male, has the red cap. Red-bellied woodpeckers, you'll definitely hear them. These are another loudmouth bird, very, very loud. Both male and female have a red head. This is a male. The male's head, the red comes all the way down to its beak. The female, it's like she just has a hood. And their chest, their belly has kind of a reddish tone to it, but they couldn't call it the red-headed because there already was a red-headed woodpecker. Pileated, you see them really quite frequently flying through. You may see them, going for like carpenter ants in a down log. They're all over. You'll hear them, and not uncommon to see them. This is a female. Again, the male, its red crest goes all the way down to the nose, and the male has a red mustache. So if you have binoculars, you may be able to tell whether you've got a male or female. The northern flicker. I would say I usually, when I see those, it's because I've disturbed them. They often will feed on the ground looking for ants. When they fly away, you get this beautiful white, they have this white circular kind of patch on the back of their feathers, so you get this like white tail flash. This one is a male because he's got a black mustache here. So all of those woodpeckers you can certainly find in the woods. You'll probably hear red-shouldered hawk. They're always out and about in the woods. You may be lucky enough to see one perched on a tree. They're a buteo, so they have kind of they're a larger bird, broader, rounder wings compared to the Cooper's hawk, which is an accipiter. It's a woodland hawk, so it's designed to fly through trees. So red shoulders, when they're soaring, they kind of soar high and they fly in big circles. The Cooper's hawks, they often fly low and through the trees, and they kind of have a pattern of going flap, flap, glide, flap, flap, glide. So, and their back is more of a grayish pattern. Hard sometimes to distinguish from the sky. I mean, it's sometimes you'll get a really good look at a hawk that's in a, when you're walking, don't just look at the ground, kind of look all over and amaze what you'll see. Vultures for sure. You'll see them absolutely. If you see like a tree with a bunch of them on there, there's something dead nearby, probably a dead deer or something like that. turkey and black vultures. The turkey have the red head. The black vultures have the black head. They look very different from the sky. You'll see them, in the sky. The black vultures have kind of these white spots on the ends of their wings, and they have a really short tail. And the turkey vulture almost looks like an airplane flying. Okay, probably won't see a barred owl, but I have absolutely heard them in the woods along the Northwest Branch. And actually, like how many weeks recently, within the last, I guess it was a few weeks ago, over on the Kemp Mill Trail, if you're facing downstream, it was on the right side, I saw a wild turkey there. That was the first time I've seen a turkey in our area. I've seen them out, on this off the C&O Canal. But where there's one turkey, there's more, because they flock together. So I don't know if a turkey got lost. I only saw one, but anyway, there, possibly I did see one. So well, I guess they're around. Streamside blue herons are you often see. Usually the belted kingfishers, you often will hear them and then see them. They have a very loud kind of rattle call, and they hang right along the stream banks. So another really handsome bird. This is a female. The female has the brown belt across her chest. Tracks and scat, so you can see evidence of what's been there. So certainly, I think, it's always fun if we get snow to try to be the first one out on the trail to make the tracks, right? And then you can also see what animals have been there. So after rain or after snow, great time to see what you can see the evidence of an animal. So this track here, this is a fox. This is a raccoon track, deer, which I think probably everybody knows, and then scat or poop, right? You can tell often by what's in it who laid it, right? This one is raccoon scat, so there's a nickel there for size. It's often black. Raccoons often will poop right in the middle of a trail, and it's not by accident. It's on purpose. They're kind of like marking territory, actually. Anything that's got like hair in it is most likely fox. Could be coyote. I haven't seen a coyote around here in a really, really long time. Maybe some of you can tell me whether you've seen them. And then this is a favorite thing. When you're in the woods, it's really easy to just bypass down logs. So to look at a down log, what's growing on it could be little saplings, moss, lichen, but sometimes you'll see evidence of a squirrel's dinner table there. The shells, these are clearly, where was this? This was on the East Burnt Mill side. So there's got to be hickories there because there are pignut hickory shells hanging out there, and that the squirrel left behind. So anyway, just kind of looking around at what's left behind, some evidence of who's been there. Let's see if there was anything else I wanted to mention about that. I guess not. Okay, almost done here. So I have seen foxes during the day in the woods, deer, of course. I wanted to put this picture up as evidence of a deer rub. So we're in deer mating season right now, coming into the mating season of several things. So foxes start mating in sometimes end of December, January, February, sometimes as late as March. The fox, they are pretty vocal. The female fox has that like terrifying screech that sounds like a woman screaming like she's being murdered, right? The fox call, that's the female, the vixen, and she's very loud. And so they have their kits, I think about 52 days after. And they'll give birth in their dens. Sometimes they dig their dens. Sometimes, a lot of times, they just take over groundhog dens, quite frankly. But you'll start seeing, their mating behavior potentially if where there's a fox den around. I know I've got one in the woods behind my house. I've actually seen them mating. They hook and they stay hooked for like hours. The deer right now, mating season started in November, will run until the end of January. The bucks will rub their antlers on trees, and it actually causes damage to the trees. It's not to remove velvet. The velvet is long gone. It's about it's communication. It's leaving their scent. It's marking their territory. Sometimes at the end of mating season, they will rub to help remove their antlers. Deer rub. There's definitely some trees out there where you can see evidence of that. And something that you won't see unless it's dead on a trail. And I put this in because where I was over on that Kemp Mill left side of the stream watching the birds, I almost stepped on a dead short-tailed shrew. And this is what they look like when they're alive. This is the picture that I took, and this is one that I got offline that you could kind of see. They have a short tail. They're built for living under the leaves. Little eyes, claws, 32 super sharp teeth. But they have on their flanks some scent glands that release a musky odor that apparently has a bad taste, because foxes often, when they kill them, will just drop them. It's like, ooh, this is even bad for me, and we'll just leave it. The other thing that preys on them are owls. Owls have very poor sense of smell, so that method of predator avoidance doesn't work against the owl. But so sometimes you'll actually see them dead on a trail, and it's usually a fox that has killed it and decided, tastes bad, gonna leave it behind. And then I just wanted to end with, as we move through winter doesn't officially start until December 21st, the winter solstice. And it runs until the vernal or spring equinox in around March 21st. But the first signs of spring happen with the skunk cabbage. They start coming up the end of January and early February. It's really an unusual kind of prehistoric looking flower. The flower this is actually a modified leaf that comes up first. It's thick, usually kind of this reddish maroon to attract flies and carrion beetles. It sort of has the resemblance and smell of dead meat, to attract them. And inside, if you look inside, it looks like a golf ball with a lot of tiny little spikes on it. The little spikes are actually the flowers. And they will later, it's not in the cabbage family. It looks like cabbage leaves. It's actually the same family as Jack in the Pulpit. So it has these red little seeds that look like Jack in the Pulpit seeds and fruit. But first sign, end of January, beginning of February, you'll see that coming up in the marshy areas. And the last thing I wanted to mention as an educator, this has made me really happy. I felt like this is the best thing that's happened out of the pandemic, is people spending more time in nature. So, people are finding solace there. Children are playing in the woods. They're building forts. This is probably how many of you, like me, I grew up playing in the woods. That's how I made my whole nature connection. Children are playing in the streams. I mean, things that I haven't seen in decades. We're seeing people making that connection. When you make a connection, when you feel a part of the environment, you want to protect it. So that's it. So